As outrage grows over Israel's deadly strike on Nasser Hospital in Gaza, international calls for accountability are intensifying. A UN spokesperson demanded justice for journalists and medics killed in a double-tap attack. Former EU ambassadors, senior diplomatic staff, and ambassadors from EU nation-states are urging member states to impose sanctions if the union remains paralyzed. At the same time, Israelis are taking to the streets in massive protests, blocking highways and demanding a ceasefire deal to secure the release of detainees. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, however, insists on pressing ahead with the Gaza City offensive, despite warnings of famine and humanitarian collapse. Will global pressure finally force Israel to end its war on Gaza, and the rising tide of protests inside Israel reshape its war policy? And how long can Netanyahu balance between the international outrage and the demands of his far-right coalition? Welcome to In Depth. As international pressure continues to grow, a strong call for action is coming from within Europe. Hundreds of senior European diplomats are urging immediate action over Israel's genocidal war on Gaza and its unlawful actions in the West Bank. According to The Guardian, a public letter signed by 209 former EU officials warned that if the European Union fails to act collectively, member states must step in individually or in smaller groups to support human rights and uphold international law, with laying out 9 possible approaches. The letter outlines 9 possible actions. These include suspending arms export licenses to Israel, banning trade in goods and services linked to illegal settlements, and restricting European data centers from processing information related to Israel's activities in Gaza and the occupied territories. This marks the third public call for action from senior diplomats, and notably the first to suggest that national governments act independently if the EU continues to stall. As the newspaper reports, the letter follows a recent failed proposal to partially suspend Israel from the EU's Horizon Research Programme in response to its actions in Gaza. Back home in Israel, the Security Cabinet met on Tuesday as the military pressed ahead with a new offensive in Gaza, while the fate of the ceasefire proposal remained in doubt. According to the New York Times, the meeting took place against the backdrop of mass nationwide protests. Tens of thousands of Israelis flooded the streets of Tel Aviv and other cities on a day of disruption, blocking highways in a push to pressure Netanyahu into accepting a deal to end the war and secure the release of the remaining detainees. Despite the mounting pressure, the cabinet ended its meeting with addressing the 60-day ceasefire and the detainee release deal currently on the table. Instead, the meeting focused on continuing military operations in Gaza City, while Israeli officials indicated a preference for a broader agreement, one that would see all detainees released at once and Hamas fully disarmed. more analysis. We're joined from Geneva by Emmanuel Jacquet, Vice President of the Geneva International Peace Research Institute, and from the occupied Jerusalem by Ratiba Natcha, Palestinian National Action Committee member. Thank you both for joining me here on In Depth. Let's start off with you, Mr. Jacquet. Now, the European leaders, including President Macron, have called the hospital strikes intolerable. The UK Prime Minister called it absolutely indefensible, as well as the Italian Prime Minister, who dubbed it unjustifiable. Do you believe that the global outrage will translate into real action or legal measures against the Israelis, or is it just, smoke and mirrors from European leaders?
Thanks for your invitation. Well, let's be frank. We can have doubts about the statements coming from the heads of states or the heads of governments of many EU member states. Recently, we had 209 former diplomats from the EU or EU member states that wrote an open letter on the situation, expressing their, let's say, condemnation and outrage about what was going on in Gaza, just the whole Palestine, in fact, as well. We had as well 50 diplomats in Switzerland, but until now it led to no concrete results. And we heard President Macron talking about recognizing Palestine, but knowing his previous positions and the positions of the other members of his government as well, we can have doubts. And we already heard that some conditions would be put over the recognition of Palestine, and usually conditions that are going against the interest of the Palestinian people and that will not be accepted by the Palestinian people.
If I could follow up there, sir. I mean, we've seen statements coming out of EU member states as well regarding the situation in Gaza, again, calling it indefensible, intolerable, and so forth. But there has been very little action, if any at all. They continue to supply arms to the Israelis. They continue to supply, spy missions to, check Gaza out for whatever it is. How is this going to be actionable? I mean, this isn't the first time we've heard from the Europeans that we're going to take action. Is this time more serious, or are we going to continue to supply arms to the Israelis?
Well, it's time to stop the genocide. Not just now, it should have been stopped before. But if we really wait once again for concrete actions from most Western governments, I'm sorry, nothing really will happen. You mentioned it. We have military support, political support. We have as well a kind of very partial media coverage about the situation there, where in the French media, for example, the situation is less accurately and fairly reported, and even in some, let's say, Israeli newspapers like Haaretz. We have a lot of political support from different political parties in France and other EU countries. We have as well networks that were constituted to support Israel. We have a lot of companies, even civilian companies, that provide services to the Israeli government and even to the IDF. President Macron said that, the support provided by France was mainly for defensive purposes, but it can be counted as well as supporting the war effort and even a contribution or participation to the genocide.
Okay, we'll get back to that again, sir, with the media situation, but let's get Ms. Natcha's opinion here. Now, tens of thousands of Israelis have staged what they called a day of disruption, demanding a ceasefire and the return of the detainees. How serious is the domestic pressure right now on Netanyahu's government? And do you believe that this pressure is based on solely returning the detainees and then continuing on with the genocidal actions taking place in Gaza?
I think that Benjamin Netanyahu is not putting the Israeli detainees in his agenda anymore. And he is going forward for exploring more and more conflicts in the Middle East, not just in Gaza Strip. As I witness, or as we see yesterday in the monthly meeting of his ministers, that he make it 1 hour earlier than it was supposed to be, ignoring the demonstrations on the streets and shorting the agenda, not including the case of ceasefire or the headline of ceasefire or any kind of agreements which is on the table now on discussions and focusing more and more in recognizing the new settlements in the West Banks instead of talking about a ceasefire or any kind of deals that it's suggested from the Egyptians or others on the world. But it seems that Netanyahu is really very insist to reoccupy Gaza, very insist to explore more and more wars in the Middle East, to change the map of the Middle East, as he says. And even when Zamir tried to mention that saving one person is like saving the life of one person is like saving the world uh, from a region respect, he starts shouting on him and says that they need someone that have more well to occupy Gaza and attack Gaza, and maybe he is going to put someone who is up Zamir and can follow the political ideas in Israel. So I think that all these demonstrations, it's not making any kind of a pressure on Netanyahu, although he is not really feeling pressure from the international community, especially from the European countries as well. Yes, there's
So do you believe that the real pressure would come in from the reserves of the Israeli army?
I don't think that Netanyahu is feeling that he is under any kind of a pressure, not internally in his government, and not externally from the street, the Israeli street, and not even from the international world, that they are not taking a real action still now to stop the genocide in Gaza, or to put pressure on Israel to stop these attacks on the Palestinian people. Yes, some small steps was taking individually in Europe and some Europe countries, but it's not a huge steps, and it's not a huge a push or pressure on Netanyahu to push him to stop his plans to transfer the Palestinian from Gaza Strip and taking control on the Gaza Strip, and not neither stopping the genocide and killing people in daily basis in Gaza by starvation or by fire.
Okay, Mr. Cheikh, now you talked a bit about the idea of not enough being done. Now, former EU ambassadors, as well as senior diplomatic staff and ambassadors from EU nations, have demanded a suspension of arms with the Israelis and prosecuting Israeli officials as well who, set foot abroad. Are these letters actually going to be actionable, or are we going to see again, like what you stated earlier, the continuation of, towing the line and spewing the propaganda by the Israeli army about them being in self-defense?
It's going to be very difficult, I guess, on the level of the European Union to adopt sanctions, even targeted sanctions against the most, let's say, responsible Israeli leaders, or the most guilty, we could say, like Netanyahu, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, or many others as well in the IDF or in some, say, the Ministry of Defense and so on. I'm not sure something's going to happen right now, which will be very, very weak, because Ursula von der Leyen, Roberta Metsola, and as well Kaja Kallas, they reiterated several times in the past their support, and even unconditional support, to Israel. And they were not nuanced or precise enough to mention what would be the nature of this support, even if it was just some moral support. It's the same in France with the head of the parliament.
This may be true, sir, when it comes to Gaza, because, again, they're towing the line when it comes to the propaganda about Gaza. But what about the West Bank, like the illegal settlements? Will there be any sort of actionable sanctions, for instance, on these illegal settlers?
Nothing significant over the issue of settlements in the West Bank happened in the recent years or the recent decades. The settlements continue to be built there. You still have people going there, the Israeli government supporting them. And you even have some foreign funds that should not be used for this purpose, but that are used by the Israeli government. And even though it's somehow a kind of unpopular topic, even in the, let's say, Israeli political agenda and debates, well, it continued for the last 20 years. Nothing really happened. You had maybe some slight inflections under somehow some Rabin or under as well Sharon, but they were mainly in fact just for PR, because the whole thing continued. And there is a focus on Gaza, on the genocide on Gaza, but there is as well another form of genocide being committed in the West Bank by gradually expelling people and over. And even recently as well in Jerusalem, there were a strong pressure against the Orthodox Church. They're all part of the same, let's say, ethnic cleansing campaign.
Okay, Ms. Nasha, now we talked a bit about the protesters in Tel Aviv. They've accused Netanyahu of prolonging the war for personal or political gain or survival. How strong is this narrative, and could it shift the Israeli society more broadly? Like, could we see, general strikes, or is it more likely that, his supporters will continue to support him despite every effort to stop this war?
I'm not sure what the meaning of Netanyahu's supporter,
His
and if
right-wing
he is
supporters,
depending.
basically.
Yeah, if he is depending on their opinion or on what. And even if we are talking about the protests from the families of the detainees, some of them are from the Likud member, the party of Netanyahu, and they are supporting Netanyahu anyway. So their demands is just very, very narrow, and it's one demand to return back their sons or family members, and then they can continue their genocide in Gaza. They are not against the genocide, and they're not against the war in total, and they are not against taking control on Gaza or not letting the Palestinian state be in any time in the future, near future or far future anymore. So these demonstration is not focusing in the Palestinian rights to exist or to have their independent state. They are just having one demand is to returning back their family's member, and then they can continue whatever they want in their policies. So they are asking for a ceasefire for a few days to return back their family members in return of maybe some humanitarian aids or something like that. And it's not like a political opinion to say that they are against Netanyahu or against his strategy, policy, or whatever in his Likud. So what we witness now is a transferring in the Israeli community in total toward more aggressive process against the Palestinian people and for their rights. And what we witness in the Knesset to vote against establishing the Palestinian state is one case, and the other cases is tens of laws that was voted on these recent days that make it impossible to have any kind of Palestinian state in the future by not just what is happening in Gaza, but extending this to the West Bank and other Arab countries around Israel to take over these lands and
So
the
you're in
people's
belief that
rights. So we are
basically,
not talking about people who are against Netanyahu
yes.
or will not vote for him again in the another election. So he is very strong, in a very strong position to take action against the Palestinian, and he is not feeling any
Yes.
kind of a pressure
But
because of these
I'm
demonstrations.
sorry. So your opinion here is that basically the Israeli public in general, or a vast majority of them, are in support of the actions happening in Gaza and in support of the continued expansion.
Yes, of course.
Okay, Mr. Jacquet, if we can get your opinion here. Now, how should we interpret Trump's call for a White House meeting on the, quote, day after in Gaza? While Israel faces the growing domestic and international pressures to end the war, does this signal the start of a direct U.S. pressure on Netanyahu, given that, Trump has given a number of contradictory statements when it comes to the situation in Gaza?
Well, you're right. The Trump government is quite contradictory. But if we look at the two mandates of President Trump and how things went on for Palestine under these two mandates, it didn't go so well. So whatever are the statements made by Donald Trump, he will never seriously put in question Israel's expansion, the settlements, and the situation in Gaza. Remember his statements about deporting the Palestinians and transforming Gaza into the new Riviera in the region. So he's maybe unhappy in the way that Netanyahu proceeds, and the fact that Netanyahu didn't always respect the ultimatums or the deadlines set by Donald Trump. But in the end, Donald Trump's not going to be a threat at all for the Israeli government. He recognized most of the annexations. He didn't seriously oppose as well the expansion of the settlements. I think he would like maybe Netanyahu to follow ways, another strategy that would be maybe more acceptable for his Western partners.
Okay, so my question here is: do you think that there is, when it comes to Trump, there is no real will to end this, or are they in support of the Israelis and the continued expansion and occupation of Gaza?
We hear a lot, I mean, we can see and hear a lot of the statements from Trump that he's for peace, that he will settle the conflict in Ukraine, in Palestine, with Iran. In fact, he's exaggerating as usual. And to be clear, I think his decisions will be detrimental to Palestine and the Palestinians. Maybe we'll have a slight decrease of violence in Gaza, but I'm not sure. Honestly, I don't see what would be the real tangible and positive elements that come from this meeting.
Okay, now Ms. Natcha, if we can talk to you here now. With mass protests in Tel Aviv and the increasing European criticism, will Washington use its political and military leverage to somehow push the Israelis towards a ceasefire, or will it continue to give Netanyahu enough room to maneuver, especially that Trump again did condemn the Nasser hospital attack, but during the same statement also contradicted himself by saying that the Israelis need to finish their job. Are you in agreement there with Mr. Jacquet that they may necessarily not have the will, or do you believe that he is in support of these actions?
Actually, Trump is not against these actions, but he is very really in need to end this war as quick as possible. Not by giving the Palestinian a Palestinian state. It's not his position. He is with annexing more and more lands from the Palestinian and the Arab region, and even taking control economically and in security way in others land. So it's not just taking over and control. It doesn't mean just annexation. It means annexation as much as they could, and maybe they will have, by agreement, by force, by whatever they want, a control economically and security control on the Arab region, maybe, or in the Middle East, so he can make his investments in the Middle East and take control over the Middle East in the way that serve his aims and goals as Trump. He has a very big plan to the Middle East, and he needs to end the war in Gaza in a way that can make these plans go in the right way that he is planning to. So he is, yes, planning to have Rivera in the Middle East in Gaza Strip, but his plans is more than that. He's thinking about the gas and other natural resources in the Middle East. He is talking about controlling the trade ways in the Red and Mediterranean Sea, and other mega projects in the Middle East that can be implemented without taking over and control on Gaza Strip by annexation or by any other ways to serve his aims.
Okay, now, Mr. Jacquet, the UN condemned the Israeli strike on al-Nasser hospital that killed medics as well as 5 journalists, and called for justice when it comes to this. Now, the double tap strike that happened on al-Nasser hospital is illegal under international law. With what's happening right now in the media, especially in Western counterparts, they're whitewashing and towing the line, where they said that the Israelis have, had their mishaps or whatever it is, and they're whitewashing it all. Can there be some sort of actionable, task that happens when it comes to this? Will the Western media hold the Israelis accountable, and will international law, or people apply international law when it comes to this, and seek justice for the journalists that have been killed, over 200 journalists so far?
Well, according to international law, especially international humanitarian law, most of these actions from Israel are illegal. They are at least war crimes, and in some cases as well, they could lead to what some people call as well a genocide, and the conditions are there. Now, more generally, you could have actions at the International Criminal Court. You could have as well other types of actions under national jurisdictions, but you would need some political impulse from some powerful countries, or some countries with some let's say, influence that would take the lead. And once again, if we consider the way the conflict is covered by most Western media, and as well the networks supporting Israel in various political spheres in various European countries, I'm sure there'll be as well tangible actions, real actions. We don't see real sanctions against Israeli leaders or products. So I'm not sure yet something will happen.
Do
It's
you
the
think
same
that
old
if
story.
Western media holds the Israelis accountable, it will at least put pressure on the political elite in these Western countries to somehow also hold the Israelis accountable?
It'll take time. It'll take time. I mean, to be clear, you can see in the pub in the shift as well. Many people are not buying, if I could say so, anymore, the narrative coming from Israel or some Western supporters of Israel, because we heard on French TV, for example, people justifying the death of journalists, saying that, well, in the end, we all know, as they say, these people on French TV, that these journalists were in fact Hamas agents or operatives. These kind of things are not punished in France. These people never received a fine, they're still invited on TV. But at the same time, you have huge parts of the public opinion are aware about the way these narratives are disseminated in the media. That's why some people look for more alternative media or information coming directly from the source. We saw what happened to journalists trying to report things in Gaza. Most of them are killed or work in harsh conditions, made to push them out to make sure they will not report what's going on there. So in the end, it will come from a political impulse from some Western governments, but which ones? Because once again, we should need influential governments, and influential governments in the West are rather considering themselves as partners of Israel.
Okay, Ms. Nasha, if we can get your opinion here as well. Internally speaking, now Netanyahu obviously is facing, competing pressures from both the detainee families and from his far-right parties and governments, basically. Do you think that also Israeli media plays a role in propagating and continuing on these genocidal actions and adding to these pressures or decreasing the pressures on Netanyahu's government?
Actually, most of the Israeli media didn't mention what is happening in reality in Gaza Strip, and they are not showing what is happening in the West Bank as well. And they have always their own story and propaganda that everyone is against them and Jew haters, and they are anti-Semitic. And this is what they paste on it to excuse all of their actions as an Israeli government and as an Israeli army as well. So in the beginning of this war, I was very fan of the international law and talking about the international law, and I make it like it's my focal point about taking how is these action is against the international law, and how these pictures and images that come out from Gaza will change maybe the international community towards the Palestinian rights and all of these things. But nowadays, I'm very far, as well as most of the Palestinian, from talking about that, because I think that the credibility of the international law was lost in those 2 years, and even the credibility of any human rights association or organization is really lost now, and no one in Palestine really depend on these international community anymore. They are very slow in their action, and I think that the only way for making Israel accountable is to change these international laws and these international community tools and organization totally, because I think that they design these organizations and tools to make Israel uncountable. So it doesn't make sense to use the same tools that exist Israel and give it the right to kill the Palestinian, to stop Israel. I think that yes, we make a lot of efforts as Palestinian to use these tools, the international laws and the ICC, and any kind of organization that can really make
Yes.
Israel accountable, but we fail till
Yes.
now to make any. Even the recognization of
Yes.
Palestine next month will be a lot of conditions, putting under a lot of conditions that some of it will be against the Palestinian
Palestinian
will.
people. Yes.
So we are always struck with these conditions and demands.
Okay, thank you so much for that. That was Ratiba Natshe, Palestinian National Action Committee member, and Emmanuel Jacquet, Vice President of Geneva International Peace Research Institute. Thank you both for your insights, and thank you for joining me here on In Depth. This brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more here on Q News.